My name is Howard DeMoy. Tonight, we have a special on the Vietnam War. We're glad it's over, but do we know what happened? First, off to Eileen Vidar, a special on how it began.
Thanks, Howard. Looking back on the Vietnam War, I feel it is necessary to see how it all got started. Back in the 1950s, during the French Indochina War, America teamed up with France, giving them economic and military support to fight communism. Already in China were many Vietnamese revolutionists who had fled there previously and had been under Communist Party leader Ho Chi Minh. In 1940, as Japan took Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh wanted Vietnam to be independent from foreign rule, made the Viet Minh a communist-led organization. On September 2, 1945, as Vietnam became an independent nation, France wanted otherwise. Fighting against the Viet Minh, the French had America to back them up with financial support. The president at that time, Eisenhower, explained the domino theory, which basically stated that if one nation fell down to communism, those surrounding would soon as well. In May 1954, regardless of the American support, the Viet Minh overran the French outposts at Dien Bien Phu in northwest Vietnam. Through May and July in 1954, France, Great Britain, the Soviet Union, China, Laos, Cambodia, and America came together at Geneva, Switzerland, with the Viet Minh and South Vietnam's anti-communist nationalists to make a peace agreement. The Geneva Accords, as it was called, divided Vietnam into two regions along the 17th parallel, with North Vietnam led by Ho Chi Minh in the capital of Hanoi and South Vietnam led by Ngo Dinh Diem in the capital of Saigon. An election in 1956 arose which would unify the country and instantly became a controversy. As Diem didn't want the elections in fear of being overrun, Eisenhower pushed to help the South Vietnam military. Diem's government was corrupt, gave no land to peasants, and was very restricting on Buddhism. In 1957, the Viet Cong, a communist opposition group, assassinated many South Vietnamese government officials. Along this time, the Ho Chi Minh Trail became prevalent. To support the Viet Cong, support was sent along the Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodian borders from North Vietnam. When Kennedy became president, he increased the military support to South Vietnam and by 1963 had over 16,000 U.S. soldiers in Vietnam. Kennedy recognized Diem becoming an issue as a leader as he moved all villagers to protected areas but began harsh attacks on Buddhism. So on November 1, 1963, the U.S. supported who toppled Diem's regime. Before Kennedy's assassination, he spoke of withdrawing from Vietnam, and after Diem's death, the bad rulers seemed to worsen and only increased the Viet Cong. In the summer of 1964, a North Vietnam patrol boat almost hit the USS Maddox off the North Vietnam coasts. Although it missed, the Maddox hit back, and this began the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. Later that summer, the U.S. declared to take the necessary measures to prevent any further aggression from the Vietnamese, and in February 1965, President Johnson's long-awaited plan to raid North Vietnam started as it was called Operation Rolling Thunder, with over 50,000 U.S. soldiers in Vietnam against the Viet Cong. Going into further information on what happened during the war is coming up next.
And we're back to an exciting story now in the fields with Mr. Morgan Baumeister in the midst of battle. Let's see what he has to say.
The Vietnam War was a war between the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong against the United States and the South Vietnamese. The United States joined the South Vietnamese to stop the spread of communism. All in all, more than 3 million people died and 58,000 Americans died.
Why, that's just riveting, Eileen. Well, next up is a story on the information about the draft. How many Americans were forced out of their jobs and into the war at a moment's notice.
Many soldiers fought in Vietnam under the country's selective service system or draft, which was established during World War I. Under this system, all males must register with their local draft boards when they turn 18. Men between the ages of 18 and 26 will be called into military service. However, many Americans tried to find ways around the draft, such as getting medical exemptions, joining the National Guard or Coast Guard, or receiving a death benefit. 80% of American soldiers come from lower economic levels. Women were not allowed to serve in combat. 10,000 women are serving in Vietnam, most of them being military nurses and others are volunteering at the American Red Cross and the U.S. organization, delivering hospitality and entertainment to troops. Many college students across the country became a powerful group of protesters. The growing youth movement is known as the New Left, which generally tried to move people towards socialism. One of the New Left organizations, the Students for a Democratic Society, was founded by Tom Hayden and Al Haywood. This society calls for restoration of participatory democracy and greater individual freedom. The freedom speech movement gains prominence at UC Berkeley, where a clash between the students and the administrators are fighting over free speech on campus. Many soldiers fought in Vietnam under the country's selective service system or draft, which was established during World War I. Under this system, all males must register with their local draft boards when they turn 18. Men between the ages of 18 and 26 will be called into military service. However, many Americans tried to find ways around the draft, such as getting medical exemptions, joining the National Guard or Coast Guard, or receiving the death pyramid. 80% of American soldiers come from low economic levels. Women were not allowed to serve in combat. 10,000 women are serving in Vietnam, most of them being military nurses and others are volunteering at the American Red Cross and the U.S. organization, delivering hospitality and entertainment to troops. Many college students across the country became a powerful group of protesters. The growing youth movement is known as the New Left, which generally tried to move people towards socialism. One of the New Left organizations, the Students for a Democratic Society, was founded by Tom Hayden and Al Haber. This society calls for restoration of participatory democracy and greater individual freedom. The freedom speech movement gains prominence at UC Berkeley, where a clash between the students and the administrators are fighting over free speech on campus. These ideas quickly spread to other college campuses where dress codes, curfews, dormitory regulations, etc. were all addressed. An organized march on Washington, D.C. with 20,000 protesters. Later, a protest rally draws more than 30,000 protesters. The anti-war movement grew beyond college campuses. Folk singers such as the trio Peter, Paul, and Mary and Joan Baez used music as a popular protest vehicle. The number one song, Eva Destruction by Barry McGuire, stressed the fact that the American male could be drafted at 18 but was not able to vote until he turned 21. The protests intensified. Nearly 500,000 protesters of all ages gathered in New York City's Central Park. President Nixon then phased out the draft, where more than 200,000 men were accused of draft offenses and imprisoned more than 4,000 draft resistors.
My, I would not want to get stuck in the draft for that war. Well, next up, a word from our sponsors.
Never has so much military, economic, and diplomatic power been used so ineffectively as in Vietnam. If after all of this time and all of this sacrifice and all of this support, there is still no end in sight, then I say the time has come for the American people to turn to new leadership, not tied to the policies and mistakes of the past. I pledge to you, we shall have an honorable end to the war in Vietnam.
This time, vote like your whole world depended on it.
Hats off to the boys in the field. Much respect to the valiant warriors who give their life for our nation. Next up, we have a story on the politics and how 1968 was a crucial year in the war.
The year of 1968 began with a daring surprise attack from the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army on numerous cities. Viet Cong agents hid weapons in coffins during New Year's Eve or tent festivities. That night, they attacked over 100 towns and cities in South Vietnam, as well as 12 U.S. air bases. They even attacked the U.S. Embassy, killing 5 Americans. Finally, after about a month of the 10th offense, proper order was restored. Meanwhile, Clark Clifford was picked to fill an empty defense secretary position left by Robert McNaris. Clifford decided that the war was unwinnable, and with that, whatever they put, the other people would match it. An anti-war coalition within the Democratic Party sought a Democratic candidate to challenge Johnson in primary election. Robert Kennedy, JFK's brother, was chosen but did not run. However, Minnesota Senator Eugene McCarthy took over, saying he'd run against Johnson on a platform to end war in Vietnam. Johnson won but later stepped down. Robert Kennedy decided to run for presidency. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Just 2 months later, Robert Kennedy was shot by Sirhan Sirhan, who was angered by Kennedy's support for Israel. With Johnson stepping down and Kennedy gone, the presidency race was between McCarthy and Herbert Murphy, Johnson's vice president. Throughout all the rioting between parties, Richard M. Nixon decided to enter the race for president presidency after previous defeat years ago. His campaign was helped by former governor of Alabama, George Wallace. In the end, Nixon defeated Humphrey and inherited the situation in Vietnam.
Well, thank you, Karina. Now we're off to reporter Hunter Reyes to tell us what finally ended the war.
In 1969, newly elected President Richard Nixon announces the first U.S. troop withdrawals from Vietnam. He conferred with National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger on a plan to end U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Their plan, known as Vietnamization, called for the gradual withdrawal of U.S. troops in order for the South Vietnamese to take on a more active combat role in the war. Seeking to win support for his war policies, Nixon appealed to what he called the silent majority, who were moderate, mainstream Americans who quietly supported the U.S. efforts in Vietnam. On March 16, 1968, Lieutenant William Calley Jr. led a U.S. platoon in search of Viet Cong rebels. Finding no sign of the enemy, the troops rounded up the villagers and shot more than 200 innocent Vietnamese, mostly women and children. When charged, they said they were only following the lieutenant's orders. 25 Army officers were charged with some degree of responsibility, but only Calley was convicted and imprisoned. On April 30th, 1970, President Nixon announced that the U.S. troops had invaded Cambodia to clear out North Vietnamese and Viet Cong supply centers. Upon hearing of the invasion, college students across the country burst out in protest in what became the first general student strike in the nation's history. More than 1.5 million students closed down some 1,500 campuses. Disaster struck hardest at Kent State University in Ohio, where a massive student protest led to the burning of the ROTC building. In response, the local mayor called in the National Guard, who fired live ammunition into a crowd of campus protesters. In the hail of bullets, 12 students were wounded and 2 were killed, both innocent bystanders. After going behind Congress's back, the president had lost significant political supporters. Support for the war eroded even further when former Defense Department worker Daniel Ellsberg leaked what became known as the Pentagon Papers, a 7,000-page document that revealed that the government had drawn plans for entering the war. For most Americans, the Pentagon Papers confirmed their belief that the government had not been honest about its war intentions. Although his re-election was questionable, Nixon did win the 1972 election. The war, however, raged on. Within months of the United States' departure, the ceasefire agreement between North and South Vietnam collapsed. March 1975, North Vietnam launched a full-scale invasion against the South. The North had captured Saigon, and soon after, South Vietnam had surrendered. In all, 58,000 Americans were killed and some 303,000 wounded.
Thank you for watching Channel 6 News at 10.